All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Amy Souza. You may know me as Known Heretic from Twitter and YouTube. And I am here live with Gabrielle Clark, who is a widowed mother of five who is now been fighting for her daughter and her son. She is fighting ultimately the identitarian movement in its many facets. She is the mother of a daughter who has desisted, and she is in the process of a lawsuit that is taking on the school systems. And welcome, Gabs. It's so great to have you here. I've spoken with you on Twitter, I've had you in spaces. So it is delightful to be speaking to you now, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about, obviously I want to hear some of your story. And I want to, ultimately observe that you have been, fighting this in many ways and have, unlike many people, been successful in keeping your daughter away from this, which I think is pretty rare and exciting. um so can you tell us a little bit about, what was her story, and what were some of the tactics that you used to keep her out of this?
Well, she was socially transitioned at school.
Yeah.
Um, that was very devastating considering I'd spent the previous year fighting CRT indoctrination, and discrimination, and violations of free speech rights for my son.
Yeah.
I had been fighting against this very thing for so long. And when I realized that it was happening to my daughter, I was completely devastated, especially since the school knew what I was doing with CRT and they didn't care. They still socially transitioned her at school through the SEL program, and she was indoctrinated into thinking she was a boy. She was allowed to use a different name, a boy's name, and she was allowed to use the wrong sex pronouns, and
Hmm.
it was being hidden from me. So
Yeah.
it was just shocking for that to happen. And I would never have known that it was happening had we not taken a long vacation and I got to see the difference in her demeanor, in her attitude, in her personality change. When it all started, I just thought she was being a typical teenager, and this is what teenagers were like now because of the pandemic. I had four kids before this one, and they didn't behave in this way. So I just attributed it to what children were like now, what teenagers were like now with the pandemic. And
Yeah.
over the summer, we visited family, and when we visited our family, she went back to her usual perky, loving self. And
Yeah.
that's when I knew something was very wrong.
Yeah. So you're saying that, like, ultimately she had this persona that was happening at school, and then when you had her in a family atmosphere, that this melted away for her, or?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, yes. It took some time. One of the things that happened was we went out to the sticks. We went out to East Texas where there's no internet. Um, and she wasn't able to communicate with her friends on a regular basis like she had
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
not only that, but she was extremely bored because there was no cable, there was no nothing. I mean, there was television, but we're talking rabbit ears. It was very rustic.
Yeah.
So there was not a lot of technology to
Yeah.
to distract her or to keep her connected to that environment and to her friends and to her social media. So once she started to get over that and accept that, um, she she went back to being her normal self. While she was in school, she had her personality had shifted quite a lot. She used to be one of those kids that would, hug you and shut her eyes, squeeze her eyes so tight and closed and all of that. And then, she kind of turned into just mean and nasty. And I didn't recognize that personality trait in her. So I did realize something was wrong before, but I just thought that this was what it was like with what the children were like now after having been cooped up for so many months, and not having any interaction with people. But when we spent that about a month away from her friends and from Las Vegas, that's when I realized there's something else wrong with my daughter.
Yeah. How so what you were in Las Vegas, correct?
Yes, we lived
And
in Las Vegas at the time.
would you say was she finding out about this, was this more from the curriculum at the school? Was it more from kids at the school? Or what was your sense of kind of her steps of how she got drawn into this whole idea?
Well, you know, at the time, we didn't think that it was the school environment. We didn't know. We we were just essentially in the dark on all of it, not really understanding any of what was happening in the school environment. But then that was after that vacation, that was when I realized there's something going on at the school.
Yeah.
And once I started to really pay attention, I did a lot of listening. I did a lot of speaking with the teachers, the administration, and just trying to understand exactly what was happening to my daughter. Things had gotten worse. And there were some other things too. I mean, my mother died over the summer, and that was really upsetting for our family. And so, it was hard to decipher what was what. It was hard to differentiate where did what come from? Where did any of this come from? And I realized a few months into this situation that it wasn't just one thing. I
Yeah.
realized that it wasn't just coming from the school.
Yeah.
Um, I think that actually it was just being allowed at the school and maybe even encouraged at the school. But I did realize that it was more so social media and her access to social media and her friend groups that had introduced it, but the school was allowing it, perpetuating it, and hiding it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how did she disclose this to you? I mean, how did she like tell you that this was going on for her, or how did you find out? Did she tell you? How did you come to know?
Well, she had a friend come stay, and that friend was trans. In which case, I was just like, kids. I'm not, you know, kids.
Yeah.
And then she started talking about having top surgery, and I'm like, I'm never ever gonna let you do that. I'm like, and then that was when the conversations started getting a little bit more contentious.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
the conversations started getting a little bit more combative
Yeah. Yeah.
about the whole situation. And the social media, I mean, there was all kinds of other things too. it was the severe personality changes, and the isolation, the nihilism, just the mean
Yeah.
comments and things. It was just not like her. And we would talk about some of it sometimes. The costumes got darker, the TikToks got weirder, and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, once I got it in my head that this was starting to get serious, um, and there were, the situation started to get more volatile, cutting and those types of things. So the self harm and all of that stuff, I was not going to lose my daughter to
No,
nonsense,
no.
especially when I knew where, I was already educated on all of this. I wasn't just like any other parent who knew nothing about it and who didn't know what to expect. I knew exactly what to expect because
Yeah.
I've been fighting this for several months already.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I have seen some, anyone who doesn't already follow Gabs on Twitter. Uh, Ultimately, you are such a wealth of information, and you have created some really beautiful threads that really pinpoint the very strategic steps that you took to get your daughter out of it. Um, and it feels when I read them like, you had a plan from the beginning. What when when you what was your plan ultimately, and you know tell us a little bit, basically give us some more information about that thread, and how you did that, and what was your plan to grab your daughter back.
A lot of it, I mean, a lot of it is just wisdom from mothering. Um, I had four other kids before her. She's my fifth, and I had a
Yeah.
whole bunch of stepkids too. I was married twice, so I had stepchildren as well. And I'm the oldest, so I had younger siblings. So
Yeah.
some of it really was just instinctual. But I mean, you're right. I did have to formulate a plan. Um, and that plan was very detailed in my mind, and it was executed with precision. There was no aspect of that was just kind of spontaneous or off the cuff. Like there were certain things that I would look for before I knew that it was time to move on to another step. I
Yeah.
mean, and I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Once the very first phase of all of this was detoxing her from her social media addiction. And a lot of people, they don't know what to compare a social media addiction to, but I did because I lived in Las Vegas. So you see gamblers all the time, and it was a very similar addiction to the way gambling is. People who are gamblers, they're addicted to the gratification of winning. They're addicted to the dopamine hits that the noises give them. They're the getting ready for the night, all of those kinds of things. And in particular, poker players, it really did look like a similar addiction to something that poker players have. The excitement that she would get when she was getting ready to make a TikTok, some of the things that she liked to do once she made the TikTok, and all of the stuff. I could see that it was very, very much like what a gambler, a poker player experiences that has a poker addiction.
Yeah.
So that that detoxing was very, very similar to what it's like to quit gambling. And so I had to, that was one aspect of the first phase that was very difficult because at the beginning, at the onset, I didn't realize the severity of it. And so, even though I had a very well laid out plan, I still had to make adjustments even to that plan because this was something that nobody really had ever um talked about before, and so I did not know what to expect. And when it happened, when certain things happen, like say for instance, I let her get on an iPad, and then and she was on there for several days at a time, maybe an hour here and an hour there, then the crying would start, and I would realize that she was having withdrawals from being able to interact the way that she wanted to, and so I would have to just take that away and pull her out of that. Ultimately, what ended up happening was that I had to take all the devices away. It just wasn't the social media, it was all the devices. So there were things that adjustments that I had to make along the way, but ultimately in the first phase, the social media was the detoxing element that needed to happen, because she wasn't going to be able to hear me with that addicted mind, that the addict's mind. She wasn't going to be able to hear me. And we had to move, and that was moving
Wow.
was yeah. You know, California, California is one of those places where if they feel like you're not affirming your child, and they feel like that child is in danger, then they'll come and take your kid away. Um, and living in Las Vegas, I knew that at some point that was going to be an issue, and I did not want to be the guinea pig for that issue. I did
No.
not want for my kids' school to think that I was the perfect um, test subject, and my daughter was the perfect test subject for this kind of action, because I mean, I was very much worried about the fact that I was a public figure, and fighting CRT indoctrination, and this was just this I would have made the perfect example for a person who is hateful, or you know what I mean, whatever. And when I realized that the school was in on it, and I realized that nothing was going to get better while we were still in Las Vegas, that was when I made the decision, okay, I'm going to have to do these things right now, and start right now. And
Wow.
so when the Christmas break came, um, that was when I made the transition and moved back to Houston. I spoke with my family, and we all kind of came to the consensus that that was the best thing.
Wow. I've heard that from other parents, that this, unfortunately, with this kind of insidious and school endorsed, it's not just peer endorsed, but it's school endorsed, sort of ultimately programming, neural programming. um Drastic measures are really required. What Okay, first of all, were you already, now you were doing some fighting of CRT? You were already in kind of some anti woke crowds and forums? Is that how you kind of knew the steps of the gender industry stuff?
Right. I was working with No Left Turn in Education. That was where I started this fight, and they're still a very good organization. They do a lot more with legislature and that sort of thing. Um, and so when this started happening, it was too much, and I had to set aside the work that I was doing with No Left Turn in Education to attend to my daughter. But while I was in No Left Turn in Education, the CRT aspect was one aspect, but indoctrination is CRT and SEL. I had even been one of the people who was able to find material to put on our watch lists. So I was paying very close attention to the gender ideology. It was an aspect of our legal case as well, because my son was asked in his sociology of change class, the oppression matrix that they tried to get him to fill out, was part of that was his sexual orientation and his gender identity. Like, why does anybody need to know that?
Yeah,
um
what use is that for the school? That's
Right.
insane.
That's, as a matter of fact, I mean, it's compelled speech, and it violates Title 6 and Title 9. You know, your school is not allowed to ask you that kind of stuff. They're not allowed to ask you your sexual orientation or your gender identity. They're not allowed to ask you your pronouns. They're not allowed to do it to the teachers either. I mean,
Yeah.
that those are EEOC violations. I mean, you know, all of this stuff that people are complaining about, they actually do have recourse, but they're afraid. They're afraid to take the action that's needed and take the action to fight against it. And you know, the gender stuff and the sexual orientation and all of that whole business. My son didn't want to answer those questions. He didn't want to answer those questions. So that was definitely a part of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I had already made myself knowledgeable about the situation with the gender identity, where it comes from, how it is kind of taught, and how it is programmed into the children on social media and at school. So whenever I was speaking with an administrator and she accidentally used the wrong name, that was the last straw. And that was when I said, this is it. That's it. I'm not going to allow them to capture my daughter.
So she used a name for your daughter. You didn't know that your daughter had changed her name at school,
No, no, I
and
did.
they never told you.
No, they didn't.
Outrageous.
Yeah. So,
Outrageous.
you know, that when that situation happened, and I still don't have the complete story from my daughter, which is the only reason why we haven't started legal proceedings in that situation yet, because I don't have the whole situation, and I don't have the whole story from my daughter. Y'all, you have to understand, this is not something you can, you know, it's not, there's not a cure for
Yeah.
this. It really is more like managing, you know, managing a long time chronic illness. You have to stay vigilant, and you have to pay attention every single day. My daughter still goes to public school. It's, you know, we've moved to Houston since then, but, you know, half of the population of her school, half of the students are identifying as LGBT. I mean, you know, that is
Yeah.
an astronomical, you know, number. It doesn't make, I mean, and mind you, I'm bisexual. I have a gay son. There's no homophobe or nothing, no
Yeah.
transphobe,
Yeah.
none of that nonsense. You know, I dated a cross dresser for years. There's no shade, there's no smoke, there's no discrimination on that basis. We never took the position that we were going to treat anybody any differently based on how they identify. But
Yeah.
even my son, who's gay, he was just like, she's not trans though.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, she's
Yeah.
not. I mean,
So
that's not who she is. Yeah.
briefly, for because we have some people here watching from the UK, and we have some non-parents who are watching. Can you just briefly explain what is SEL for those who are not already familiar? I think parents will be familiar, but some will not.
Right. So SEL is social and emotional learning. And it is a program that we have here to in its inception, it was originally intended to kind of bridge the gap between minor behavioral problems and, the ability to stay in school and be effective in school. So anybody who was experiencing anxiety or depression, and they were acting out in school, the SEL program was supposed to remedy that, so that it would prevent the disciplinary action that normally would have taken place. So if a child was acting up in school or in class, then they would, be sent to a therapist instead of given a detention per se. You know what I mean? Or being suspended from school if the infraction warranted that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and as a daily or even a weekly instruction, the SEL program taught the children how to manage their feelings, how to, how you've heard that phrase, use your words, that kind of thing. It was supposed to do that, but they've weaponized the SEL program, and really it kind of goes hand in hand with CRT. So the SEL program ushered in CRT, and the CRT enabled transformative SEL, which is more like kind of like a hardcore sex ed, if you will, and getting into gender ideology, and really just kind of evolving into some weird religious experience for our kids that we are not invited to. It's I mean, if you're in favor of that sort of thing, then it's perfectly fine. But if you do not subscribe to this ideology, then you're not invited. You're not even they will actively hide it from you to protect the children from.
Is just like, to me, and I've heard about this from other parents. I've spoken to a couple mothers, Jennifer and Jeanette from Partners for Ethical Care, and they talk about this. The secret keeping of the schools. I mean, that's just like a 101 safeguarding failure, keeping secrets with kids from parents.
Well, what is so fascinating about this whole thing is that there is this idea that children are not safe with their own parents. I mean, throughout your life, if you're safe with anybody as a child, your parents are number one on that list, because they're the people who wanted you from the beginning, you know what I mean, and who loved you from the beginning, and who do almost everything that parents do is for their children. So the idea that teachers are actively working against parents and even telling the children that your parents aren't safe that is a complete violation. It's a
Well,
violation of parents' rights, and it's a violation of ethical
for
standards.
sure, because the other thing is, first of all, teachers are mandated reporters.
That's right.
So if you think that I am truly a danger to my child, then you call CPS. That is what you do. You do not keep secrets with my child. You don't become an adult who now has a special relationship with my child where you're keeping secrets together. These are mandated reporters. If they think the child is truly in danger, call CPS. Don't become some sort of, I mean, you've now become a groomer. You're not protecting the child. You are keeping secrets with the child.
Well, see, that is, and now a lot of parents don't understand that falls under an area that I have I have given this the because we didn't have the we didn't have the language to talk about this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So and you know when we talk to people like James Lindsay or some of the others, you know, James Lindsay's a genius. I can't understand what he's saying. I got to go to the dictionary all the time every time I'm, you know, reading something of his or you know, I got to look up a Latin translation for crying out loud. I got, you know, all of these Ferrer and Marx and you know all of this stuff. I had to really educate myself on all of that stuff. But every parent doesn't have the months and months of research that I do.
Yeah.
So when all of this stuff was going on with my son, and I started to really pay attention to how they kept all of these things from me then in his situation, and how they were able to kind of, well, I mean, lie and gaslight me and all of these things that they did. I just said there is not a way to understand. I was at a conference and I was talking to some academians, you know, and they're, you know, doing their thing, and I'm just like, yeah, it's some kind of weird parallel language. And the guy turns to me and he's like, yes, it is. And I said, that's parallel language messaging. That's exactly what it is. And that's what I've given it that moniker. Everything that these teachers are indoctrinating and grooming our kids to believe, there's a parallel language that they use. So when they say something like your parents are not safe, that word has been, the definition of that word has been broadened. So it does not just mean safe in its traditional sense. To them, safe means your parents are not going to approve, and words are violence, so you're not safe. So if they're not going to affirm, then you're not safe. This is the logic. This is the parallel language that they're using to indoctrinate our children into mistrusting their own parents, into thinking of their parents as strangers and as harmful. That's another one. That's another buzzword, harmful. You know, those are the kinds of things. So the mandatory reporting, that would not fall under that category, because the way that they're using safe is not the same as the legal definition of safe. Like I said, it's a parallel language. So the parallel language messaging, the gaslighting, the word cyclones, the word salads, the circular thinking, redefining of words, all of that stuff falls under the umbrella of what I have been calling parallel language messaging. And I've
Yeah.
seen it now with both of my children.
Yeah.
Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, this Kool-Aid ultimately, you know, I've said to people that this Kool-Aid is more dangerous than the Jonestown Kool-Aid. You know, that,
Most definitely. Most definitely. And we've already seen casualties from that, from this cult. I mean, you know, one of the reasons why I came out about my daughter, and mind you, I was fighting this situation, and I was able to successfully have my daughter desist without any permanent incidents or permanent damage that I feel like she cannot overcome. However, the reason why I decided to speak out is because I did see the story of a mother whose daughter is no longer with us, and that is Abigail Martinez. Now, Nicole Solis is, you know, Nicole Solis has been in this fight for a long time. She and I are both in a similar situation. She's using lawfare, as am I. She was sued, I am suing. So we're both in the legal aspect of this situation. So she and I had, you know, kept in pretty regular communication on Twitter, paying attention to what's going on, paying attention to the trends nationwide, and in some instances worldwide. So when I was watching one of Nicole's speeches, and I saw Abigail Martinez's testimony, and I was just paralyzed because I realized how dangerous the situation could have gotten had I not acted. Now, I knew what to do, but there are thousands of parents that don't know what to do. So I couldn't live with myself if I had answers and um didn't share them with other parents who are suffering, especially since for so many months I had been praised for being brave and being courageous, and here it is, I was, having a hard time getting over my own shame for not being a good enough parent. But you have to put that aside. There's no shame in this. They are actively trying to take your children. They're grooming them, and no amount of parenting is going to protect them from what's coming.
No, no. So let me ask, what was the tipping point? What was, the point where your daughter could start to hear you, or what do you think it was? What
Once we got through the first phase, we got through that first phase. We got through the social media addiction. I was able to get her out of her addicted brain, and I was able to get her physically out of the environment, and I was able to surround her with people who she could trust, other adults that weren't school
Yeah,
that weren't at school, but that I trusted to have the same values as I do. And so once I was able to put her in that environment, then the deprogramming had started. And that was very difficult because I the first phase of getting all of this together, getting on a healthy diet after, I mean, while she was detoxing, I had to kind of let her eat a bunch of junk food and stuff because all of that pent up energy and all of the anxiety, that sort of thing, it needs
yeah.
to go somewhere. And she ain't old enough to smoke. So, when you're detoxing, like you're detoxing anything else, you eat a lot of, caffeine and sugar and stuff like that. And so once I got past that first phase and I got her into a regular schedule, a decent diet, and a lot of hardcore exercise. She was in track. She did track every day. When she wasn't doing track, she was skateboarding, all of those things. That was when, the really hard stuff had to start.
Yeah.
And so once I got to that place, I had to start telling some hard truths. And part of that was getting her to recognize how her hormones were causing the issues that they were telling her was the reason why she was trans. So she's a teenage girl. She's got regular hormonal changes on a week to week basis, even a day to day basis, depending. And so whenever, something would come up and I could see that there was an issue, I said, okay, now listen, wait, think about what it is that happened today, what
Yeah.
it is that's putting you here, and let's talk about what the serious, how this is putting you in this position and what this is doing to you. Because a lot of the time she would just blame it on me that she wasn't getting to talk to her friends, that she wasn't getting to spend time online like she wanted, all of those things. So once that commenced, and we had gotten into the phase 2 of the deprogramming, I recognized in her one day that she realized that what I was saying was the truth. I mean, and I really had to say, okay, listen, listen, you know how lazy I am. Would I be doing this to hurt you? Would I just do this for no reason? Do you think that I would tell you all of these things just to annoy you? No, absolutely not. I would give you that thing and make you go away. Like, this is, you know that I do not put this much effort into nothing
Yeah.
just to annoy you. So just
Yeah.
think about this. Am I telling you the truth? Am I telling you the right thing? If you really, really, really believe that you can trust me even just a little bit, the anxiety you're feeling right now, you take that, you take it outside, you go and skateboard. Because, at this time, she was still asking for um antidepressants. She was still wanting to get over the feelings she was having and the hormonal changes that she was experiencing. And so, I had to tell her no to all of these things, but I had to replace it with something that she liked and that made her feel good. So she loves to skateboard. So I said, go outside, skateboard for 45 minutes and see how you feel then. And
Yeah.
then we can talk about. I mean, and that was when I saw the light go on
Yeah.
um in her face during that conversation. And that was when I knew we had gotten over the hump and the deprogramming could start and she could at least hear me.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's commitment, and then that's perseverance. I mean, bravo. That
She's my only daughter. I mean, she's my only daughter. And, it was very emotional. And it was very difficult. There were times where I thought, I'm not ever gonna have a relationship with my daughter that I waited so long to have, that was not a possibility anymore, that my daughter was gone. That, I mean, that was very hard. And when I realized that I was not ready to just accept this, and I could see the torture she was in too. And if you're living your best life, you are not in that kind of torture. You know what I'm saying? If she was living her best life, this ain't it. It was very much, it was very much, it very much reminded me of the kind of thing that addicts say, when they're addicted to something. They
yeah.
think that it makes them better. They think that it makes them better. And they're living, they're tortured and they're living such a horrible life, and they're always having some tumultuous situation going on. And so, I knew that that couldn't be the end. I knew that that couldn't be it. That's not what people, aspire to do with their lives. And we're talking about a middle schooler.
Well, and I think, that it's so smart what you said to her, because it kind of put that responsibility back on her to look at herself and her own actions. And I really feel for these kids and how they're being hurt by the schools, and by the ones who do go to mental health professionals, who are being hurt by mental health professionals, because puberty is an emotionally painful time. That just is what it is. I mean, I'm the oldest of three daughters. I remember one day going
Me too.
home crying. I didn't know why I was crying, and I'm
Yes.
just like crying, and my mom is holding me, and my sisters are looking at me like I'm an alien, and they are like asking my mom, like, why is Amy crying? What's wrong with Amy? What happened? And
Right.
my mom is like patting me, and she just says, sometimes girls just cry,
That's right. I
you
mean,
know?
and I did not get that from my own mother because I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 45 years old. And, the baby boomers didn't spend a whole lot of time with their children. They put them in activities or they just kind of let them go off, come back when the street lights are on, kind of thing. And so I didn't get that same direction from my own mother. And so, when I realized what was happening with my daughter, and I could see some of the same things that I had gone through, and that my daughter was experiencing, that was also part of the second phase of kind of breaking down and getting into the trusting. She trusts
Yeah.
me, I trust her. She trusts that what I'm saying and doing are in her best interest for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, because they're teenagers.
Well, they're gonna push. I mean, it's part of that will phase. They're learning how to have some inner authority, so they're gonna push
Right,
back. That's natural, but
right. There's a barometer, right? And there's a metric that you kind of use. And with me, my daughter is so very much like me. I knew more about that barometer than I thought. And so, and not only that, but I did bring her into an environment with relatives who knew me as a child as well. So it was
yeah,
easy for her to hear things from other adults that knew me and and could express to her and verbalize to her that there was a correlation between the experiences that she was having and the experiences that they watched me have. And we were able to talk her through some of those things so that she recognized her behavior and recognized her hormonal changes and all of those things as completely and totally normal.
yeah. Well, and I like
Mhm.
I mean, that's so important because I feel that she's telling you ultimately, I don't feel good. She wants antidepressants. But the thing is like, you know the object here is not to run away from
Right,
those feelings, but
right.
to be able to process them and carry them.
Process them. And even if you can't process them, because she is a kid,
Yeah,
and she's not going to be able to process all of those feelings. But she can still cope with those feelings until they pass, or until she can get a better understanding of them, or until there's that she can just discuss it with me or discuss it with someone that she trusts. So all of those techniques and mechanisms for raising a teenager, um, they're important that we remember that when our kids are going through this. A lot of the times people tend to think that teenagers and kids are just little adults, and if
yeah,
you give it to them in a soft enough tone, then they're going to be able to understand. And that's just not the case. Their brains are different. They're not fully developed. There are some things that you're going to have to make more palatable for them to understand. And really, quite frankly, they have to learn and utilize and know when to utilize coping skills and coping mechanisms that are safe and not going to be damaging.
yeah, yeah. So tell me, okay, so now do you feel like she is in a place now where she is out of the woods, I guess? Or you said earlier it's like there's upkeep
Yes.
still involved.
Yes. I mean, she's a teenager, so she does want to hang around friends that are not always, going to be friends that are going to exhibit the kinds of behaviors and the kinds of morals and ethical standards that I want to see.
Yeah.
So now we are we are talking about what a friend does, and what what kind of friends are acceptable and what kind aren't, and just other things. I mean, some of this stuff is stuff that you wouldn't even think is should be an issue. Like with the masks were a major issue in this, because they cause so many teenagers to have such bad acne. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're still trying to remedy that. And a lot of the times she acts indifferent about it. And I know that she's affected.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot more to all of this than just the attitude or the behavior or the actual transitioning nonsense all by itself. There is the understanding of how to properly rear a teenager through all of this,
Yeah.
which can be tricky sometimes. you know um it's not always easy, and I am not a perfect, I I lose my temper, and I'm not always you know as nurturing as I wish I were. Unfortunately, there's literally no guide. There's plenty of child rearing books, but there is no book to prepare you on how to do this. um
No, well, there's no, I mean, ultimately, you mean this is a human being. You're raising small human beings. I mean, there's not they are not I don't know, like a dishwasher or a computer. Like they don't have a standard set of operating functions. They are ultimately like the most spontaneous, beings that you're ever going to try to wrangle. I mean,
Right. And they're ever changing. I mean, like Bill Maher said the other day, they're all phases. It's all just phases. And
yeah.
you don't even really find out what kind of person you are until, you enter your late 20s. So it is, I mean, there's definitely a personality, but there are phases, and this
Yeah.
has phases as well. But I guess what I mean is, excuse me, with most kids, there's there's a standard handful of things that to expect.
Yeah.
With this, there is no book to tell you what to expect, and there is no manual to guide you through the phases of this. What do you say to your teenager who tells you that they have multiple personalities and that they don't? I mean, that I mean, and I
Well,
mean,
and then you're in a situation where, in fact, the professionals who have, written these, child rearing books, now they're actually working against you.
right,
They're basically like, your child has, if your child says they have multiple
right,
personality disorder, they definitely do. You-
right,
So you're not in a situation where these so-called, professionals in that field can even offer you, or they're unwilling to offer you guidance, and they're offering you, ultimately they're pushing the problem. They are
right.
part of the problem.
And this was one of the reasons why I felt like I could not go to, I mean, looking for therapists in Las Vegas was practically impossible. Yes, there are some, but the majority of them are religious in nature, and we're not. So that was going to present a problem, because I think that was going to be a contentious uh environment for her, because they've taught her religion is an enemy. So, there were just too many things that that were working against us, that I felt like I had to come up with this plan on my own with the help of her brothers, with the
Yeah.
help of my family, my extended family, and basically with some, with some um references to different things that I had learned on my own. Um, I looked into religions and people who escaped from religious cults. The Warren Jeffs children, those people, I did do a lot of research about them. The Woodsboro Baptist Church, um, Megan Phelps, I remembered about her, and I did base a lot of what she said. It inspired a lot of my plan for her descent. So, or desistance, those kinds of things made me gave me the tools that I needed to kind of um revamp them into this, because there was nothing for this. There was no book for this. I couldn't go and find a guide to detransition your kid. That book does not exist. So I had
Hopefully, I've been interviewing all these mothers this week. I mean, maybe you all have to get together and ultimately write this book. I think there is a book that's needed. I mean, we need this book.
I really do. I mean, that's one of the things that I feel like this whole aspect of the indoctrination process is probably the most needed, because there's already so many kids who have started transitioning, and they are in the social transition process. I did speak with a lot of mothers whose children have already grown up and it's too late. But I feel like, if you can catch it early, middle, and high school, then you might have a really good shot at bringing your kid back
Yeah.
and pulling them out of this. And if, for for all I know, she could grow up and still decide that she wants to do this, but she's not going to be tortured by it while she's a kid, you know?
No.
So that's the only way that I feel like, um, as a mother, that I could attack this situation, is that I'm going to do everything I can to give her the best life possible, and give her the most happiness possible without having this torture in her mind all the time.
No, and it is torture. I mean, once you start walking down that path, it is. It's medically endorsed and authority endorsed self-harm. It's a path that includes breast binding and double mastectomies and
Right.
genital mutilation and wrong sex hormones, and all of that is pain. It's pain and it's dissociation.
Right. I mean, the the puberty that you go through, where your body is, you're physically visibly changing. um that was that was really didn't seem like it was a problem before she started back to school, and started going back to school. And I'm not saying that it was solely the school's fault, but I do think that between the school and social media, she had 5,000 some odd, men following her on TikTok. I mean, that, yeah, I mean, that was terrifying,
Ugh.
and, having to deal with that was very upsetting. And what in the world, what are they telling my daughter?
Well,
Was
it's
very upset.
very scary. I mean,
Yes,
I
it
if
is.
I don't know if you follow the gender mapper at all,
They got
Alex.
kicked off Twitter today, actually. I
Oh,
saw that.
good. But she's documented basically this TikTok to OnlyFans pipeline.
Right. And that was, I mean, when I looked at the TikTok, and I started looking at um the conversations and all of those things. That was one of the ways that I was able to use that information to explain to her, you know what, you know how I know you're not a boy, because boys don't do this. This is what you just what this you've said something similar to this. This is not something that boys say. You know how I know that? Because I got four sons. This is
Yeah.
never a problem that boys have. This is not something that
Yeah.
boys are concerned about. This is not something that boys do. That's how I know you're
Yeah.
not a boy. I mean, so I was able to use some of the things, some of the discoveries that I made through her TikToks and her Instagrams, to go back and use that later, for
Wow.
to get to kind of give that tough love, and let her know that she was being captured by a cult, and they were using these things and telling her these things to exploit her.
It's so scary. It's so
Yeah.
scary.
I'm
Um,
lucky that she did. I mean, I'm lucky that I caught it early enough, because in Las Vegas, kids grow up very, very, very quickly. In another year, and she that I may have lost her, and she could have been gone and trafficked. Like, that's how serious the situation is, and I think
yeah,
a lot of parents do not realize that that's what you're looking at when you're looking at this cult.
God, God. Well, congratulations. Do you want to talk a little bit about your lawsuit and what are you doing there, and what's happening? What's the movement? I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what you can say and not say, but what can you tell us? And then ultimately, how can people support you in that?
Right. So the lawsuit has already reached some really exciting points. Initially, what happened was that my my son was being discriminated against at his school. He was asked to list his identities, his race, religion, um, sexual orientation, gender identity, disabilities, socioeconomic level, that sort of thing, and attach signifiers to those identities. So the options were oppressed or privileged. That was it. And depending on what your identities revealed, you were on the hierarchy of the oppression matrix. And, because I'm half black and half white, and my first husband was black and my second husband was white, this son is three-quarters white. So some of my kids are three-quarters black and some of my kids are three-quarters white. So this one of my children, he looks white, blonde hair, blue green eyes. He looks like he's a white kid. And so, because he's white and male and this, that, and the other, he's just privileged. Now, mind you, my husband died when William was 1 years old. He doesn't have a single memory. And at the time, we were living in a motel because I was recovering from a disability. I'd been in a wheelchair for several years and we lost everything. So William was sleeping on a mat on the floor, not a mattress, a mat on the floor of a dirty motel. And being in transition like that, it was very difficult. Sometimes his brother would spend a whole day in the food pantry line or whatever, because we were in trouble. Me being in the wheelchair for all of those years, it was very difficult. So to tell my son that he's somehow privileged because he has all of these identities, because he's male, because he's white, because he's got Judeo-Christian values because he's able-bodied. He's able-bodied, but I'm not. So he's still suffering from the same, you know what I mean? As
Yeah.
if, he still has the same, he doesn't have a single memory of a parent, even though his father was a lawyer. I mean, all of those things. This is why it's so terrible, because you cannot reduce people to aspects of their identity and then attribute some sort of affluency or the lack thereof to them. Because you can come from the poorest places in China as a woman, have a kid, and that kid grow up and do something really great. You don't, that your background and your race and your religion in America does not determine whether or not you're going to be successful.
And I wouldn't want them identifying my child as either one of those
I
things.
I didn't like that either. I mean, if they I mean, now at the time, my daughter was the most accomplished person in our entire family by leaps and bounds. She had $100,000 ballet scholarship to the city ballet.
Wow.
She had won her science fair that year with an invention that she made that didn't even work, but the invention, the design was so good they had to give it to her. So
Wow.
I mean, those she's in the 98th percentile. She has so much more going for her than her brothers ever did. And so my daughter is just oppressed because what? I mean, those kinds of things. I wasn't going to allow them to attribute oppression to my daughter, or oppressed to my daughter, just like I wasn't going to allow them to attribute privilege to my son.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we asked for some concessions. The school refused. So I took steps. I
It was that important to the school to cling to it. Like, why was it even that important to the school? Like, I guess I like, it sounds like just like this activity that's like maybe meant to, like, I don't know, in the best, I guess in my mind it's like, in the best case scenario it's like some sort of diversity learning activity. It seems insane to me that they wouldn't back down from this. Like,
you know why? Because they don't think that parents are smart enough to fight back. They don't think that parents are brave enough to fight back. They know that all they have to do is hold out,
yeah.
and the parents will give up.
Wow.
And some of them won't even challenge it.
Wow.
They lied right to my face. We're not teaching CRT. There's a slide in there that has Kimberly Crenshaw's face on it. It has intersectionality at the top of it, and in the description it says Kimberly Crenshaw, the foremost authority on CRT. You know that kind of thing. They could have told that to some other parent, and they might have gone away,
Yeah.
but not me.
Yep.
So if you do something to hurt one of my children, I'm not going to let it go. So when they lied to me and they refused to put him in a different class, I just said, I'm not going to just tell my son to hide his face and just deal with it and just, suck it up and just tell them what they want to hear, because that was going to be damaging to him as a man, to him as a person, to his autonomy, to his agency. I wasn't going to allow that. No. So when they would not relent, I started sending emails to everyone on the chain of command. And when they ignored me and sent me to somebody else, By the time the runaround had reached a full circle and they sent me back to the teacher, that was when I said, okay, I have everything I need. Let's go find some help. And that's when I went public, and
Yeah.
I started looking for lawyers
Yep.
to help us. And we filed our lawsuit in December of 2020. And by April, they relented. They allowed him to opt out of the class, expunged his record, thereby allowing him to graduate. Now, they were threatening to keep him from graduating
To
before.
keep him from graduating because he would not say that he was privileged or oppressed.
Yes. So he had to complete that course.
Oh
And
my.
because we refused to complete that course, they threatened to fail him, thereby preventing him from graduating. And even in the emails, it says William will not be graduating from Democracy Prep. That's what it said. And I'm paraphrasing. So, you know, in the beginning, this started out with a single assignment and some very, very discriminatory slides. But ultimately, all of this was a violation of our civil rights and a violation of my parental rights, you know, because I specifically asked that he not be discriminated against in this way, and that he be allowed to opt out of this class because I felt like it was inappropriate. And when they would not allow that to happen, and we had to sue, that was standing in the way of my rights as a parent, and it was standing in the way of his rights as a person. So by April, um after a few depositions, they said, you know what, we'll go ahead and let him graduate. So we'll expunge that grade, we'll opt him out of that class, and he'll graduate on time with his peers. But by then the damage had already been done. They'd already they I mean, the initial filing, they tried to get the initial filing dismissed, all of that stuff. They tried to brand my son as, a bad kid and all of that stuff. This wasn't We weren't going to just allow this to happen, and we weren't going to just accept this, because it had damaged our family and my
Yeah.
son. Already the damage had already been done, and there was irreparable harm to our entire family. And now, after having to deal with all of this, and having to deal with what's going on with my daughter, you can see the the amount of damage that this indoctrination actually truly does.
Yeah.
And so we refiled, and that case is ongoing. We're waiting now to hear from the judge. So, I've in the beginning, I hired legal counsel, and I still owe quite a bit of money to my first lawyers. We do have a public interest firm representing us right now, but the the initial costs were a lot. It was a lot. And
And for
so
everyone who is watching right now, in the show notes, if you are watching, either if you're watching on Twitter, you'll have to go to my YouTube or my Facebook. But if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, in the show notes, there is a link of where you can go and support Gabs with this legal battle. Because it is, I mean, bravo to you for sticking to this. I mean, I'm going to continue to be baffled that the school, this was somehow so important to the school. I mean, this is not an English class. This is not a math class. This is not some sort of, class that, he'll need for either college or for the rest of his life. Like this sounds like some sort of, diversity training class, which, whatever, like that's fine, maybe, but like that they've fought, they were gonna friggin' not graduate him over this, like that is, of course, it's absolute insanity, and bravo to you for sticking with it. And now I heard you say this in a space, but I'd love to hear you repeat it here. This, if this goes through, this is a precedent setting case, is that correct?
Yes, this is a landmark case. And because of the compelled speech aspect, this will set a precedent for parents' rights and for First Amendment rights
Yep.
for our children. And I honestly do believe that this will not only help in the CRT fight, but I
Yeah.
honestly believe that this is probably the best tool that you can use to fight the gender ideology as well, because
I
this will ultimately, I believe, be a good place to start when we're trying to fight against surveys,
Yep.
because surveys are also compelled speech. And when they're asking things like, what kind of medicine does your mother have in her cabinets, and where do you like to go in your house to masturbate? I mean, those kinds of questions are being
My
asked
God.
as young as kindergarten.
Oh my God.
So the compelled speech part of our lawsuit, I really do believe that will be a tool that parents can use to fight back against their school systems and against the teachers, and against radical teachers, and against radical uh, administrators for the next 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, oh my God. Thank you for starting this battle and sticking with it, because my God, it's exhausting and expensive.
Yes.
So, I really appreciate the work that you do, and I really appreciate your voice on this issue, because I know that it takes a lot of courage to speak up about this, especially when it pertains to your own family. It's personal, so it's not just you talking about an issue that you're concerned with. It is personal to you and to your family, and you have a need to protect your family as well. So, I appreciate you talking with me today and sharing your story. And for anyone who doesn't know, Gabs is on Twitter. I think I put your Twitter handle in the show notes, but if I didn't do it already, I will do it retrospectively, because you can go there, and Gabs has some pretty well documented threads about these different stages that she's been talking about today. So, if you want to see them written out in words as well, you can go and do that. Um, I don't know. Are there any last thoughts that you want to share, that you want to, I don't know, say to parents or to other activists, or to, I don't know, just to any of the viewers who are watching now or will be watching later?
Well, to parents, I would say, um, your children are your most valuable asset.
Yeah.
And you know, if they are captured, there's no there's no watch and wait anymore, because this is not a coming out story.
Yeah.
This is not the 90s. This is not them coming out as trans.
No.
Okay? This is being captured by a cult. And you really do have to attack it in that framework.
Yeah.
So so the watchful waiting um that they used to recommend is not going to work
Yeah.
in this scenario. The there it's your children, especially if you're talking about the rapid onset gender dysphoria. I do think that there is a difference between what, like if your 2-year old just wants to wear dresses all the time, like that's something, I think that that's a little bit different. But if you have a middle school that has rapid onset gender dysphoria, that I feel like that is not a watch and wait situation. That is a I might have to sell my house and move situation. If you, I mean, I feel like it's very similar to what would happen if my daughter had been inducted into a gang.
Yep.
I would not have just, said, well, come back at 5:30. You know what I mean? Like after
Just
your
watch
gang
it
bang.
and wait.
Yeah, like I wouldn't, yeah. I mean, there wouldn't be a watch and wait situation. And I wouldn't be saying, well, when you're done gang banging, wash your hands for dinner. I mean, that's not how I would have attacked that problem.
Yeah.
You know, that is a sell your house and move to another state problem. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? I
Yeah. Yeah.
mean, that may not be feasible for everyone, but I have to tell you, um, the kind of problem that this is, it is going to require some drastic action.
Yep.
And so, and the other thing is, do not let your kids emotionally manipulate you or use emotional blackmail to um to to trick you into thinking
Yep.
that they're going to lose their minds or whatever because of this, especially if you're able to catch it early. Some
Yeah.
of the children some of the parents that I've spoken to have had children threaten to kill themselves and threaten this and threaten that. You know what, let me tell you something, you have to really be tough, and you have to really um be ready and willing to kind of out manipulate them. I mean, I'm her mother. If
Yeah.
she's going to end up in a psychiatrist's office, she's going to end up in that psychiatrist's office because of something that I do to her, not because of something that some other, idiot is going to do to her. She's going to be
Yeah.
complaining about me being a smother. That's
Yeah.
what she's going to be complaining about, not complaining um that she was trafficked because some idiot, decided to tell her that she needed to be a boy. I mean, I didn't want my daughter to end up being a victim of somebody like R. Kelly or somebody like Marilyn Manson. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like I didn't want that.
Yeah.
So all of the emotional manipulation and all of the emotional blackmail that your child will throw at you, you have to be strong and see
Yeah.
past.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Gabs, just a pleasure having you on, and great speaking with you. I know we're going to be talking a lot more in the future. Thank you, everyone who tuned in today. Please share this widely. This is a very important conversation, and I want to honor you as a mother. I want to honor all of the parents out there who are dealing with this with their kids. It is a really challenging thing to navigate, but perseverance and courage, can get you through. And thank you, Gabs, for all of your words of wisdom and sharing that story with us today. Again, in the show notes is where you can go and help Gabs with this lawsuit that, it is for Gabs and her family, but it is really for all of us. This is a precedent-setting suit, so please show some support there. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and my Facebook, and you can throw some love my way as well. Thank you so much. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you.